Yarka fuune kam jirtu matiin hambatu fayyaa keessan naggasu gurmeessan jedhama ammoo history for remedial unit 3 part 2 sin qabadhe dheera part 2 letti kawai lallu zab English British revolution kan jedhu walii laalla bira beka walii laalle part 1 yelet about renaissance and the age of Croatian discoveries kan jedhu laalle ture irra kallattiidhaan the English British revolution kan jedhu walii laalla kallattiin gabarumsa kan jalqabnu the English British revolution gaafa jennu first of all the problem started in England in 1603. 1603 what happened in England? Last year of Tudor dynasty. Queen Elizabeth I died. She was unmarried woman. Rakkoon kan jalqabe England keessatti bara 1633. Yeroo santimaatee dubartiin England bulchaa turte. She was Queen Elizabeth I. Queen Elizabeth I kan jedhamtu kan bara 1558 kaaftan bara 1623 bulchite. She was the last year of Tudor dynasty. Kan taate kuni ilmoon qabdu dubartiin kun Oromoon duute. Kanaaf nam England keessatti rakkoon dhufe nam naangootti dhufe bakka dubartii kana bulchuun jiru. She was the daughter of Henry VIII. Henry erga du'een booddeetti kan aangootti dhufe. Her brother a person called Edward VI. After Edward VI, another woman came to power. She was Queen Mary I. After Queen Mary I in England, Queen Elizabeth came to power and she ruled from 1558 up to 1603. As a result, he was died in 1603. Problem started now. What happened? She was the last year of Tudor dynasty. Tudor dynasty means the dynasty which ruled England for a long period of time until 1603. Kanaaf rakkoon dubartiin kun ilmoon qabdu yookiin immoo dubartiin heerumne waan taateef namni aangootti dhufe England bulchuun dhabame. Kanaaf dynasty means the rule of family. Dynasty gaafa jennu immoo aangoon abbaa gara ilmaatti kan darbaa deemu waan ta'eef dubartiin kun ilmoon qabdu. Kanaaf backgroundin kan jalqabe rakkooni 1603 England keessatti. After that, he was succeeded by her nearest relative James VI, the King of Scotland, and they became as also what James I, King of England and Ireland. This person known as the first King of England and of the Scottish-Stuart dynasty. Kanaaf dynasty dura England gubbaa ture Tudor dynasty kan jedhamudha. Tudor dynasty mean especially which ruled England until 1603. Amma the last queen of or the ruler of Tudor dynasty, Queen Elizabeth, died. She had no child. As a result, her relative, a person called James VI in Scotland, he was the governor or the ruler of what Stuart dynasty in Scotland. Gaafa England in Tudor dynasty bulchu, Scotland kan bulchu moo Stuart dynasty dha. Kanaaf dubartiin kun ilmoo waan hin qabneef her nearest relative yookiin immoo firri dhiyoo James VI kan jedhamu maqaan isaa Scotlanditti James VI gaafa jedhamu England gaafa dhufu immoo iseedhaam James I jedhe. Kanaaf James tokkoffaa gara aangootti dhufe waan ta'eef namni kun kanaaf King of England and Ireland after 1603. So in the place of Tudor dynasty, Stuart dynasty came to power during that period. So from 1603, England and Scotland had the same ruler. That means under a person called James I in England or James VI in Scotland. But this country are separate countries until 1707. This one is the beginning of problem in England. So again, what to make different or similar England and Scotland? Both countries were Protestant, but different ideologies and different churches. In the case of Scotland, the national church was known as Presbyterian Church. In the case of England, the national church known as Anglican Church. The two countries were Protestant countries, but different churches in each country. The first one is Scotland. There was Presbyterian Church was a national church, especially more strictly or solely Calvinists. This one is the official church of England during that period also. Anglican Church. This one is especially idea or differences formed between England and Scotland. But still from 1603 up to 1707, England and Scotland simply, they were ruled under the same ruler, but separate countries. So, in 1707, under a person called Cromwell. Cromwell means the commander of army, general of army, during the English Civil War, especially under the parliament. As a result, this person came up with no proclamation which known as the Act of Union. The Act of Union, when you say the proclamation of 1707, in which England and Scotland politically united somewhat in 1707. Kanaaf amma bara 17 duwwaa torbaatti kana jechuun bara 16 duwwaa 3 kaasee from James the First in 1603 up to 1707 up to the Act of Union. England and Scotland politically they did not unite. Then they ruled under the same ruler. Garuu bara 17 Act of Union kan jedhu namni kun seera baase waan ta'eef a person called Cromwell. As a result, England and Scotland united and formed a single unity. So Act of Union mean England and Scotland politically united only briefly in the time of Cromwell with a single parliament and a single government. Kanaafuma bara 17 irraa kaasee England and Scotland kun the same ruler qabu kimmosit bulchaa ta'uu qabu garuu biyya tokko ta'anii jiran amma isaan biyya tokko kan ta'anii biyya tokko kan hundeessan in 1707. 1707 mean Act of Union also proclaimed. After that, these two important countries had a single parliament and a single government, and they also came to be known as what? Great Britain or Britain. Kanaaf maqaan Great Britain kan jedhamu kan moggaafame bara 17 when England and Scotland united as a single country by the Act of Union. After that, England and Scotland came together. They formed a country which known as what? Great Britain or Britain for short. Kanaaf jarreen kun yookiin biyyi kun lamaan walitti dhufanii bara 17 biyya tokko hundeessanii biyyi kunis maal jedhama Great Britain or Britain kan jedhamudha. Kanaaf Tudor dynasty which ruled England from 1485 up to 1603. This had made English monarchy strong but not absolute monarchy. Kanaaf dynasty England bara 1485 kaasee hanga bara 16 duwwaa 3 bulchee kun 03 bulchee kuni Tudor dynasty jedhama. Tudor dynasty established England as a strong monarchy but not absolute monarchy. Kanaaf monarchy cimaadha hundeessee monarchy cimaan kun absolute monarchy miti. What's the main reason? Because of two important reasons. The first one, English monarchy was not absolute because the king had no regular professional army. This means the first reason. Mootiin England bulchaa ture mootonni England baay'inaan absolute monarchy dha. Garuu monarchy dha garuu absolute monarchy miti. Maaliif absolute monarchy hin taane? The king had no regular professional army yookiin mootiin kuni gaafa England bulchu loltuu dhaabbata mataa isaatiin qabu. Regular kan ta'e loltuu dhaabbataa hin qabu. But the king had also navy, royal navy that mean humna galaanarraa qaba. King had no regular professional army, but the king had only a small bureaucracy of paid officials. Hojjettoota mootummaa kan ta'an mindaa nyaata muraasa qaba. Kanarraan kana fi the English kings had no regular professional army. As a result, it was not absolute monarchy. This one is the most important. The second reason, what's the main reason? The existence of the parliament. The parliament or national assembly called the parliament also another reason. As a result, England under Tudor dynasty was not absolute monarchy because of two important reasons. The first one, the king had no regular professional army. The second one, the existence of representative national assembly called the parliament. Lama famu parliament jiraachuunsa. The parliament, especially all laws and the taxation, had to be approved by the parliament. But the parliament only met when the king called it. Parliament kunis gaha mootii waamiyaa walaa ga'u malee taaksiidhaa fi seerri kamayyuu England keetti kan inni mirkanaa'u parlaamaadhaan waan ta'eef. Kanaaf mootonni England yeroo baay'ee maalmi absolute monarchy miti. But strong monarchy under Tudor dynasty. Again, what happened in England? There was also corporation of land-owning nobles, gentry, rich citizens. That means the producers to govern efficiently in England. Kanaaf England immoo karaa biraatiin tokkummaadhaan bulchu waan ta'eef isaan kunis land-owning nobles, land owners in other word yookiin immoo abbootii lafaatiin gentry mean which known as elite. Afaan ammaatiin elite kan jedhamudha. Isaan kuni rich citizens that mean bourgeoisies. They came together and govern effectively. This is also another reason. Gentry were just below nobles in rank, but at the part of small class, except having no noble elites. So English economy was not yet very advanced. The Dutch were leaders in merchant capitalism of in 17th centuries. Walumaa galatti England absolute monarchy waan hin taaneef hawar guddoo lamaafi. The first one, the king had no regular professional army. The second one, because the existence of representative national assembly called the parliament. Kanaaf England kan absolute monarchy with under what? Tudor-Stuart which ruled England from 1485 up to 1603. One of the most important one. So the parliament also meet at the place called the Westminster outside London. Kana walga'iin immoo England keetti kan ta'amu yookiin immoo paarlaamaan kan ta'u bakka Westminster jedhamtu. Westminster, when you say out of London, the place known as out of, that mean Westminster mean the meeting place of the English Parliament at that time. Again, the Parliament has also two important houses or assemblies. The first one known as House of Lords, the second House of Commons. Kanaaf English Parliament kun bakka lamatti qoodama yookiin immoo house lama qaba. The first one, the Parliament now the House of Lords. House of Lords, when you say not elected, it consisting of what? Head of the noble families, Archbishop and Bishop of the official of the Catholic Church of England. Again, House of Commons, when you say elected and represent the people. Voting of election of this House of Commons was not democratic. What's the difference between House of Lords and House of Commons? Parliament in England balbala lamaan kana qaba, House of Lords and House of Commons kan jennuun kana. House of Lords is not elected gaafa jennu, that means they were appointed by the king. Kanaaf kan ramadu yookiin kan bakka buusu mootiidha jechuudha, not elected gaafa jennu. Kun immoo of keessaa garee gurguddoo kana sadan qaba. The first one, the head of noble families yookiin immoo baalabbaataa yookiin immoo isaan kana of keessaa qaba. Archbishop warra Itoophiyaa keessatti isaan kun liqa Phaaphaas warra jedhamanidha. Isaan kun Bishop Phaaphaas of keessaa qaba waan ta'eef isaan kun garee gurguddoo lama isaan kun House of Lords irratti ramadamu. Inni kan biraan immoo inni gara gadii Lower House of the Parliament in House of Commons jedhama. House of Commons mean elected filannoodhaan and represent the people, bakka bu'aa uummata isaan kunis wanta adda godhu isaan kana. House of Lords not electedidha. Kan filataman miti isaan kun appointment aangootti dhufu jechuudha. Eessa keessa? From heads of nobles families and the Archbishop and the Bishop keessa, Bishops keessa kan isaan dhufan. But that of House of Commons mean elected and represent the people, bakka buutuma isaan kun. Again, voting elections for members of House of Commons was not democratic. Hatumay democratic miti ni kun filannoon isaanii. Sometimes problem in England. Again, fairly large number of adult males could vote, but certainly not all adult males. There was also respect and obedience towards gentry, and those families took lead in public affairs. This one is about House of Lords and House of Commons. Walumaa galatti Parliament England kun bakka lamatti qoodama, House of Lords fi House of Commons bakka gurguddoo lamatti qoodamu. Again, the members of gentry or elite kan jennuun kana, a few bourgeoisie, merchants, layers in House of Commons. Kanaaf House of Commons kan of keessaa qabu garee sadan kan. House of Lords akkuma dura jenne consisted of that heads of nobles family, Archbishop and the Bishop of the official Church of England. Isaan kun the members of House of Lords. House of Commons miseensa kan ta'anii isaan kana sadan. The first one, members of gentry, that mean elite. The second one, few bourgeoisie merchants and the layers in House of Commons. Abbootii seeraa, the few bourgeoisie and the gentry maal ta'u miseensa House of Commons ta'uutaan sana keessatti. Kanaaf in England, English Revolution problem started between the king and the parliament. After somewhat, when you say the king mean King Charles I. Here, the beginning of revolution was during the reign of King Charles I, who ruled England from 1625 up to 1649. Then problem started during that period. Serious conflict between the king and the parliament began in the reign of Charles I, who ruled England from 1625 up to 1649, and the cooperation between the king and the ruling class began to break down at that time. Kanaaf tokkummaan cooperation of between the king, bulchaa hoogganaa isaanii fi ruling class began to break down during that period. So, what's the main problems of conflict? How conflict started in England? Because of three important reasons. The serious dispute were about foreign policy, money, and religion. These were the three important causes for the outbreak of the English Revolution during the reign of Charles around 1625 up to 1649. The first cause mean foreign policy. What does foreign policy mean? In the early his reign, England was involved into expensive and unsuccessful wars against Spain and Portugal, and the failure led to criticism of the king and his minister. This one is known as what? Foreign policy. Foreign policy manni England waraana gurguddoo lama keessatti hirmaachuu isheeti. Tokko that were expensive and unsuccessful wars against Spain and France. Waraanni gurguddaan ishiin itti makamte kunis waraana baay'ee gatiin itti bahe and unsuccessful. Waraana fiixa kan hin baane kan ishiin itti hirmaatte waan ta'eef waraana kunis Faransaay Biriteen gubbaatti waraana ishiin banteedha waan ta'eef kufaatii yookiin dadhabbuun ishii kumaal fide jechuudha. The failure led to criticism for the king and his minister. So this one is known as what? Foreign policy as the cause of English Revolution. Charles, like most European kings, was usually in financial difficulties because of that war. This one is the main cause. The second cause is money. What happened in money mean? Especially when the parliament did not vote sufficient money in taxation. Charles collected money without parliament approval in number of what? This one is in England in number of ways which has people felt were illegal. This also another reason. Kanaaf sabni lammaffaan immoo maniidha. Maniin gaafa jennu immoo qarshiin sababaadha. Akkamitti qarshiin kun sababa ta'a? Gaafa paarlamaan baay'ata gaasaaf ramaduu didu. When the parliament did not vote sufficient money in taxation, Charles collected money without the parliament's approval. This also became what? Illegal for the people of England during that period. This one is the second cause. The third cause known as religious problem. Rakkoo amantiiti. What happened here was growing suspicion that Charles and his French Catholic queen Henrietta Maria were taking England away from Protestantism and back to Catholicism. This was not true. Garuu maal ta'eera? Rakkoon lammaffaan uummanni warra England kun shakkiidha qabu. Shakkiin isaanii maanni Charlesidhaa fi haati manaa isaa Faransaay kan taate the Catholic queen ishiin amantiin ishii Catholicidha waan taateef Englandiin gara Catholic gara Protestant gara Catholic deebisuu shakkii isaan qaban. Sababii kanaatiif religion also the main cause for the beginning of English Revolution. As a result, the revolution started because of three important causes. The first one because of foreign policy. Foreign policy gaafa jennu England involved into and that mean expensive and unsuccessful war against Spain and France. This mean foreign policy. The second one, money. Money when you say the King Charles collected taxes or money without the parliament approval. This also known as what? The second cause. The third cause of English Revolution mean religious problem. What happened religious problem during that period? The English people also somewhat during that period suspicion that the Charles and the French Catholic queen Henrietta Maria were taking England away from Protestantism and back to what? Catholicism. Jedhanii kan isaan shakkaniif kanaafi haati manaa Charles kun immoo dubartii Faransaay amantii ishii Catholic kan taateedha. Kanaaf shakkiin isaanii maanni suspicion of that people. Shakkiin isaanii Henrietta Mariaadhaa fi King Charles kun Englandiin Protestant gara Catholic deebisuudhaaf jiruudha kan isaan shakkan. Garuu kun immoo gaafa laallamu is not true during that period. This one is the main problem. Walumaa galatti rakkoo England keessa ture kun yookiin the cause of English Revolution kan taani waa sadan kana foreign policy, the second one money, and the third one religious problem. So another problem occurred in England. Background to the beginning of revolution. For 11 years, that mean from 1629 up to 1640, Charles ruled England without parliament. Kanaaf barri 1629 kaasee hanga bara 1640 no parliament in England. Parliament meeting is somewhat special during that period. The parliament not meet during that period. Kanaaf bara 1629 kaasee hanga bara 1640 kan jiru England keessatti parliament hin ta'e. Charles ruled without parliament. Did not call meeting and continued to collect money in what people believed to be illegal ways and ruled like an absolute monarchy. For how many years? For 11 years. Kanaaf waggaa 11 guutuudhaaf England keessatti paarlaamaan hin teenye. Mootichi Charles kun paarlaamaa kana waamne. Kanaaf inni mootii ufee maal gochuu jalqabee this person continued to collect money in what people believed to be legal ways and ruled like an absolute monarchy in England. This means the beginning of problem. Again, the last one, the beginning of revolution. Revolution started in 1637. Revolutionary crisis began in Scotland for the first time. Kanaaf revolution yookiin warraaqsi kan jalqabe kutaawwan Ingilandi keessa yookiin biyya Britain keessa eessattidha? Kutaa Scotland keessatti. What happened during that period? In 1637, without consulting Scott, the Charles imposed the Church of England prayer book for church service in Scotland. This one is known as what? The immediate cause for the beginning of the English Revolution. First of all, we have discussed about 3 important causes. The first cause means foreign policy. Foreign policy means the war between England and France and Spain. The first one, that war was unsuccessful and expensive war. The second cause, basic cause, also money. Money, when you say the person called Charles collected tax without the parliament approval. The third cause means we have discussed that, especially foreign policy. Foreign policy, that means religious problem. Can I chumal de churan? War England kun shakkii qabu. Ati manam isaa fi namni Charles jedhamu kun England amantii Protestant irraa gara Catholic deebisanii waan shakkaniif isaan kun koosii gurguddoo isa basic causes jennaan isaan kana. But there was also immediate cause occurred in 1637. What happened in 1637? Without consulting Scots, Charles imposed the English that means the church imposed the Church of England prayer book for church service in Scotland. This one is known as what? The beginning of English Revolution. So this one is known as what? Immediate cause. Kanaaf immediate cause waraana kana English Revolution kana kitaaba kadhannaati. English prayer book. Prayer book kun eessarraayyuu England irraa gara Scotland church service dhaaf yookiin taayilaaf kan fudhatameedha kun. So revolution started in 1637. So what is the immediate cause of the English Revolution? Prayer book is a Canada. This one is the most important one. What the problem? What is Scotland jiran or is Scott waratan? What marisisini? What in Charles the first kitaba kadhanna England irraa geesse Scotland geesse. Kanaaf inni kun rakkoo isa fide Canada. So Scott opposed this and repelled for nationalistic reason. Also to what Calvinist Presbyterian Scott prayer book did look Catholic. Isaan warri keessaayyuu warri Catholic warri kun warri Scotland kuni warra gorsa Calvinistiiti. Churchiin isaanii immoo Presbyterian churchidha. Kitaaba kana akkamitti ta'anii jarreen kitaabni kun prayer booking kun yookiin kitaabni kadhannaa kun kitaaba Catholic ta'anii waa yaadaniif isaan kun. So the rebellion started because of this. In 1637 revolution started in Scotland because of the prayer book, the immediate cause of the English Revolution during that period. Again, hoping to obtain money to suppress the rebellion in Scotland, Charles called the meeting of the English Parliament. Now, in 1614, kanaaf waraanni jalqabeeraan kanaaf qarshii argatee yookiin immoo paarlaamaan qarshii akka murteessuuf lola Scotland kana jiru kan immoo to'achuudhaaf to suppress what? The rebellion in Scotland. Charles called the meeting of the English Parliament. Kanaaf paarlaamaan waggaa 11 paarlaamaan ture jenneerra bara 1629 no parliament in England. Now he believed that to get money to suppress what? Rebellion in Scotland. Charles called the meeting of the English Parliament in 1614. But the Parliament refused to approve any taxation. And the king quickly dissolved what was called the Short Parliament. What is known as Short Parliament? The Parliament met only for 2 years, from April up to May 1614. This event known as what? Short Parliament. Short Parliament kan jennu parlama yeroo gabaabaaf ta'ame. Keessaayyuu ji'a 2 qofaaf. Bara 1640 keetti kan ta'e kun parlamaadha. Why is this parliament is known as Short Parliament? Because when the Parliament refused to approve any taxation, the king quickly dissolved the parliament. This event known as what? Short parliament. Short parliament means the parliament meet from April 1640 up to May 1640. One of the most important one. Now this agreement formed between the parliament and King Charles in 1640. Again, Charles wanted to defeat the Scots without money from the parliament, but he was unable to defeat them. Kanaaf ergasii morga paarlaamaa kana diigeen booddeetti namni Charles jedhamu kun qarshii otoo paarlaamaa irraan argatiin lola Scotland eegata jiru kana to'achuuf yaalii gaggeesseera. But unable to defeat them. As a result, the government's authority began to break down in England, having broke down in Scotland. Again, the king could not avoid calling his English parliament again. As a result, in November 1640, and they became known as Long Parliament because it met from 1640 to 1653. The second event known as what? Long Parliament. Short Parliament and the Long Parliament mean different from each other. First one, Short Parliament mean the Parliament held for 2 months. But the Parliament also held for the second time. King Charles also called the meeting of the Parliament for the second time. That Parliament also met from 1640 up to 1653. This event known as what? Long Parliament. Kanaaf erga qarshii kana otoo hin argatiin lola Scotland kan absuudhaaf yaalii gaggeesseen booddeetti unable to defeat the Scots. As a result, the king also called the Parliament for the second time. As a result, the Parliament also met for 13 years. This event known as what? Long Parliament in England. Initially, during that, the member of Lords and the Commons of the Long Parliament were united against the king now. Jalqabarratti garuu miseensonni paarlaamaa Lords and the House of Commons. Jalqabamaa jenneera, the House of the Parliament in England divided into 2 important houses. The first one, House of Lords, and the second, House of Commons. Then in the Long Parliament, the Parliament which held from 1640 to 1653. In that case, initially was at the beginning, in other words, the members of House of Lords and House of Commons of Long Parliament were united against the king, that means King Charles. Kanaaf the disagreement formed between the Parliament and King Charles in 1614. Charles was forced to accept laws seriously limiting his power. As a result, then the Parliament itself became divided into 2. Kanaaf Parliament the first one, the supporters of the king. The second, the opponents of the king. Parliament dura gara tokko ta'e mootii karatti kaa ture immoo dhumarra ga'e bakka lamatti addaan cabe. Kanaaf a small majority of House of Commons and a few House of Lords, they wanted to take away all powers of the king and they make him puppet parliamentary leader, fearing his revenge because they did not trust him. Sababii kanaatiif jarreen kun sodaata waan ta'eef gareen tokkoffaansaa warra mootiidhaan morman against the king. Opponent of the king also formed. Isaan kun seewudhaan that mean small majority. A small majority warraatan House of Commons and a few House of Lords isaan kun. Isaan kun mooticharra aangoon du'a fudhachuu barbaadu. They wanted to take away all powers from the king and they make him the puppet of parliamentary leader, fearing his revenge because they did not trust him. Nama kaan hamanne waan ta'eef qoraaluu nu baata waan jedhanii yaadaniif faallaa mootummaa dhaabbatan. Gareen lammaffaan immoo elite less than 1 second or half of the Commons and most of Lords, they turned to the king, believing the Parliament was going to somewhat far in opposing the king. Kana isaan kun immoo karaa mootitti kan deebi'an immoo namoota muraasa. Walumaa galatti Parliament England kun Long Parliament divide into 2. So point of the king is the supporters of the king. They also feared that political crisis was breaking down. All the authority in the country and the political and religious radicalism among the lower class were growing danger. So these conservatives who now found he had growing support. As a result, some of them also supported the king. So that one lama qabu kun tokko gara gadiirraa religious radicalism amantiin sababii karaa hundumaatiin maal ta'a crisis amantii dhufaa jira, political crisis dhufaa jira. Mootummaan aangoon mootummaa kun immoo kufaa jedhanii waan yaadaniif. Again, political and religious radicalism among the lower class also growing a danger. Kanaaf karaa biraatiin somewhat rakkoon amantiif rakkoon siyaasaa lower class yookiin immoo hawaasa gargar jiru irraa guddachaa waan jiruuf The second group, also the conservatives group, now found it had growing support of the king. They began to support the king during that period. They also opposed wish of what strict Calvinists in the parliament to abolish what archbishop and bishop in the Church of England and somewhat change the English prayer book during that period. So, basic question on which the king and the opposition to him in the parliament will not compromise. Somewhat following the rebellion in Ireland. The one also started first of all in Scotland, center of revolution. Still now the Ireland also became center of revolution during that period. Again, the parliamentary opposition demanded control over an army, which would be raised to suppress this revolt. Kanaaf warreen immoo faallaa paarlaamaa kanaa kan itti morman kuni maal barbaadu warreen kuni somewhat also the parliament opposition demanded control over an army. Loltuu to'achuu barbaadu. Why? Because which would be raised to suppress this revolt, fearing that otherwise the army would be what used against themselves. Loltuun kun deebiin uffita waan jedhanii waan yaadaniif isaan kun immoo kaayyoon isaanii fedhiin isaanii maanni control over an army warri faallaa kanaa ta'an. The king refused this demand. Kanaaf mootichi Charles immoo fedhii kana barbaanne gaaf sana keessatti. So final incident making civil war unavoidable was the king's attempt, which somewhat failed to arrest 5 leading members of the parliamentary opposition. Kanaaf namni kun immoo maal godhe namoota shan walitti qabee parlaamaa keessa. Then the king left the capital to raise an army from his supporters in the provinces. After that, the second step of the king. Kanaaf final incident also making civil war unavoidable. Civil war started. The civil war divided into the first civil war and the second civil war. We'll discuss now. So, in that case, to arrest 5 leading members of the parliamentary opposition. Kanaaf namoota hooggantoota parliamentary ta'an kana namoota shanan kana qabee mootiin kun. After that, the king also left capital to raise an army from his supporters in the provinces. Kanaaf namni kun immoo magaalaa dhiisee bahe gara gandaatti yookiin immoo gara provinsiitti gad bu'ee maal gochuu jalqabe loltuu mataa isaatti filachuu jalqabe. Again, the parliament also raised an army and the fighting began in summer of 1640. Amma garee lamatu hundeeffame. Civil war started between the parliament and the king and his supporters. Kanaaf, the civil war started in 1640. Summary of 1640 is the beginning of fighting or conflict in England during that. So this led to about the beginning of the first civil war. First civil war means from 1640 to up to 1646. That fought between the parliament and the king. Kanaaf civil war yookiin immoo waraanni walii kun bara 10 jalqaba first civil war kan jennu bara 1642 kaasee hanga bara 1646 kan ture. Kanaaf between the parliament and the king. So the parliament had support from London, support from navy, support from got military help from what is Scotland in 1643. Kanaaf parliament kun civil warin kun kan gaggeeffame garee lama gidduutti. The first one, the parliament and the king gidduutti yookiin immoo mootii Charlesidhaa fi parliament gidduutti gaggeeffame civil warin kun. Kanaaf parliament gaaf sana gargaarsa iddoo gurguddoo sadirraa qaba. The first one from London. London is the richest part of the country. The navy humna galaanaa warra England irraa qaba. Again, the king parliament also got military help from Scotland. That means the Scottish army in 1643 supported the king. Royalists were the supporters of the king. Royalists jedhan immoo mootiidha kan isaan deeggara. So that the royalists did well in fighting as the first. Kan bara jalqaba irratti lola kana kan danda'e yookiin immoo kan loluu danda'e warra royalists. Royalists means the supporters of the king in England during that period. In short, in 1642 up to 1646, the first parliament started or fought in England between the parliament and the king. Kanaaf parliament kan deeggaran immoo London navy dhaa fi military Scottish military army or the military force in Scotland in 1643 dha. Then mootii kan deeggaran king was supported by the royalists. Then as the first stage, the royalists also somewhat did well in fighting at the first. The parliament won a war by raising a new model centralized army. Centralized force called the new model army. Kanaaf parliament immoo loltuu mataa isaatii qaba. Loltuun parliament kunis maal jedhama? The civil war which known as new model army jedhama. New model army mean the force of the parliament Against the parliament, that means the parliament won the war. That means civil war. By raising a new centralized force called the new model army. This one is the most important one. So, parliament loltuma qaba loltum parliament kun civil war ketti mal jedhamu jechuudha. New model army jedhamu. New model army also led by two important able generals. Kan kana gaggeessan immoo jeneraalota beekamoo kan immoo dandeettii ciccimoo qaban lama isaan kun. The first person, a person called Thomas Fairfax fi Oliver Cromwell. These were the two important generals of the parliament military force which known as the new model army. Kanaaf loltuun warra paarlaamaa kun maal jedhama new model army kan jedhamu kana kan gaggeessan immoo that new model army led by two able generals. The first person Thomas Fairfax and the second person Oliver Cromwell. But finally, all the civil war began. Cromwell's military and political career irratti yookiin immoo hooggansa jalatti jechuudha civil wariin kan jalqabe hooggansa Cromwell jalatti. Why after the first civil war? Fairfax that means Thomas Fairfax also withdrew from political life and Cromwell became what? The principal army leader. Kanaaf ajajaa waraanaa waliigalaa kan civil war keetti kan new model army yoo ta'e jechuudha kanan booddeetti a person called Oliver Cromwell. Why? A person called Thomas Fairfax somewhat withdrew from political life after the end of the first civil war. Your civil war in jalqaba waraani walii jalqaba kan wagga dhumateen booddeetti namichi Thomas Fairfax jedhamu kuni sirookiin immoo jireenya isaa maal keessa obbaaseera siyaasa keessa obbaaseera. Walumaa galatti paarlaamaan gaafa gaggeessamu garee lama gidduutti gaggeeffame king and royalists. That means the first one. The parliament, that means which had its own army which known as new model army. New model army led by two important generals. The first one Thomas Fairfax and Oliver Cromwell. Finally, a person called Oliver Cromwell became the principal army leader during that period. So the first civil war, the problem was to get firm political settlement. Erga civil war in umatiin booddee civil war ended with the victory of the parliament. After that means after the first civil war, the problem was to get a firm political settlement. Kanaaf rakkoo isaa kana fuudhaaf yaalii gaggeessan. So the settlement involved the king, parliament and the army. Kana waliin mari'atee rakkoo kana kan furu garee sadan kanaadha. Tokko the king who lost the civil war and the parliament won the civil war and the army loltoonni kun. Again also Charles had lost the civil war. That means Charles defeating the first civil war. Almost everyone as the first expected. Nama katiin jawwatame kan eegame jalqabeedha. A person called Charles, but he was defeated. And he went to the monarchy to continue with what Charles is still king. Kanaaf warreen kan mal barbaadu wanted the monarchy to continue with the Charles is still king. This one is the most important one. Kanaaf edda civil war booddeetti maal gochuu jalqabanii political settlement yaalii gaggeessaniiru. Kan itti hirmaate immoo marii kanarratti the first one the king, the parliament and the army. Against the parliament also the somewhat winner. The king was who defeated in the first civil war, including his army. So the parliament and the army leaders negotiated with the king, but with no success. Kanaaf parliamentidhaa fi kamammoo paarlaamaan biyya Ingiliandidhaa fi army leaders kan ta'an that mean new model army that of the parliament. Namicha faana walii galuuf yaalii gaggeessaniiru. But with no success during that period. As a result, the parliament without its royalist members who had joined the king in 1642 apparently had power at the end of the first civil war. Kanaaf civil war irratti injifannoo kan gaggeesse kam jechuudha? Paarlaamaadha jechuudha. In that case, new model army had guns and the army was not willing just to be disbanded. Sababii kanaatiif new model army kun loltuu mataa isaatii qaba. Guns yookiin immoo meeshaa waraanaa mataa isaatii qaba. Isaan immoo was not willing to just to be disbanded. Kun immoo maaltu barbaadani? Bittimoo yookiin immoo jireenya isaanii or demoralize ta'uu barbaadan or sent to suppress the rebellion in Ireland. Kanaaf the army went its voice to be heard in the settlement. Kanaaf paarlaamaan kana barbaada waan ta'eef loltoonni maaltu sagalee isaanii akka dhagahamu barbaadu achi keessatti. Kanaaf first civil war ended with the victory of what? The parliament during that period, one of the most important one. But the army itself was divided. deebi'uu loltuu mataa isaa bakka lamatti qoodee similar to the parliament. As far as the parliament was strong and opposed the king. But the parliament divided into two, supporters of the king and opponent of the king. Then, similar to that, during that period, the army divided into two. The first one, conservative group. The second one, radical group. Kanaaf loltuun deebi'anii bakka lamatti qoodaman. Loltoonni kunis maal jedhamu? The first group known as what? The conservative group, especially including a person called Cromwell. Cromwell being the principal leader of what? The army. That means the new model army during that period. But part of the army had become much more radical. Loltoonni baay'een isaanii maal barbaadu? Radical warra ta'an. Isaan kun conservative who oppose any change. Oppose any change in what in England. Warri jiraa warraan immoo maal jedhamu? Garee waraanaati. But part of the army had become much more radical during that period. Because of this, the army divided into two. In that case, before and during the civil war, radical religious and political ideas had emerged. Kanaaf wanti akraarii jedhamu kana kan fakkaatu. Politically and religious, somewhat it also that ideas also emerged. As a result, during that period, new political movement started in England. That new political movement known as what? Liberal movement. Liberal movement, when you say in England, which formed during and after the Civil War, especially this one is known as before and during the Civil War, radical religious and political ideas had emerged. Kanaaf karaa biraatiin wanti amantiidhaaf siyaasa hamaan waan argameef England keessatti gareen siyaasa haaraan hundeeffame. Gareen siyaasaa kunis maal jedhama? Secular political movement. Secular political movement mean which free from religion. This movement known as liberal movement had been appeared in England. This one is the most important one. Kanaaf yeroo waraana civil war kanaaf isa duraaf isa booddeetti manni garee haaraatu hundeeffame. Garee haaraan kunis secular political movement dha. Kana jechuun the political movement free from religion jechuudha. Isaan kun immoo maal jedhamu? Liberal movement jedhamu. Isaan kun wanta gurguddoo sadii barbaadu. The first one, liberal political movement wanted democracy. Isaan kun democracy akka dhufu barbaadu. Religious toleration, wal dandeettii amantii barbaadu with no state church. And isaan kun immoo reform of law, complicated and expensive and harsh legal system barbaadu. Kanaaf isaan kun immoo reform of law, complicated. Kanaaf reforming baay'ee suuta'ee barbaadu. Expensive wanti ta'an immoo harsh legal system akka reform ta'u barbaadu isaan kun. Kanaaf the new political movement started, which is known as secular political movement started. This is known as liberal movement. Isaan kun immoo fedhiin isaanii waa sadii. The first one, democracy. The second, religious toleration with no state church. Kanaaf mootummaan church yookiin immoo amantii keessa galuu akka hundeeffamne barbaadu isaan kun. Kan biraa immoo reformidha barbaadu. Reform is law, complicated and expensive, harsh and harsh legal system in akkam reforming akkasii dhufu barbaadu. Waan ta'eef this movement known as liberal movement mean in short secular political movement in England which started after the end of Civil War. So liberals had strong support among small craftsmen, wage workers in towns like London and ordinary soldiers and the junior officers of what? The new model army. So abi kanaatiif isaan kun model gartoota baay'ee qabu. Gartoonni warra liberal kun yehuudha. The first one is small craftsmen. Warra hojii ogummaa hojjetan, hojii harkaa hojjetan. Wage workers hojjettoota. Warra qacaraman hojjetan in towns like London warra ta'an. Ordinary soldiers loltoota warra hangoo hin qabne. Junior officers of the new model army. Loltoota warra giddu galeessa ta'an isaan kanatu deeggara. Kanaafi liberal political movement are support, strong support among small craftsmen, wage workers in towns, especially in London, ordinary soldiers and the junior officers of the new model army. They supported what? Supported liberal. Liberal means secular political movement in England, which started after the Civil War, first Civil War. So this element in army said that they did not want to have shed their blood in Civil War for nothing. Kanaaf loltoonni walitti wal qaban dhiiga keenya dhangalaasuu hin barbaannu. This element is in the army said that they did not want to have shed their blood in Civil War for nothing. Waan gatiin baamni dhiiga keenya dhangalaasuu hin barbaannu jechuu wal qaban. So they had been fighting for political and religious freedom of ordinary people. Nuti kan lolluu fi walabummaa siyaasaaf amantii namoota dhaaf yookiin immoo namoota warra aangoo hin qabnee fi ordinary people isaan kanaaf lollaa jedhanii yaadu. So they had been fighting for political and religious freedom for ordinary people during that period. This one is the most important one. So the lower rank of the army were strong enough to enforce the army leadership to hold a political decision with the representative. Kanaaf warri immoo lower rank of the army warri aangoo qaban warra garagarii loltuu keessa warri jiran yookiin immoo loltoonni garagarii jiran maaltu gochuu qaban humna cimaa qabu. Maal gochuudhaaf waliigalteen siyaasaa waliin dubbiin siyaasaa akka hundeeffamuudhaaf. Sababii kanaatiif in 1647 decision also political decision held with the representative. This event known as what? Putnary debate. Putnary debate when you say political decision with the representative. This one is the most important one. Sababii kanaatiif waliinaasan yookiin immoo waliin dubbiin yookiin mariin siyaasaa political decision kan jennu kun loltoota bakka bu'aa loltoota hoggantoota isaanii gidduutti kan gaggeeffame bara 1647 maal jedhama? Putnary debate jedhama. Putnary debate mean which known as political decision between the army or lower ranks army and their leader. Leaders is known as Putnary debate in 1647. But this ended without conclusion or agreement. Garuu waliin maltee political decisioning waliin dubbiin kun yookiin immoo mariin siyaasaa kun murtee yookiin immoo furmaata tokko malee yookiin waliigaltee malee addaan bahe. This led to the beginning of the Second Civil War in 1640. First Civil War mean from 1642 up to 1646. Again, this agreement also formed during that period. As a result, in 1648, Second Civil War started because of two important reasons. The first reason because of the invention of England by Scottish army, and the second one because of the royalist insurrection in England. Insurrection when you say revolution in England. So abi kanatif Second Civil War in kan jalqabe sabor guddoo lamaaf. The first one because of the England invention of England by the Scottish army. Loltuu warra Scotland dhufanii England waa weeraraniif. Lammaffaan immoo royalist insurrection in England. Royalist mean supporters of the king jechuudha. Isaan kuni warraaqsa yookiin immoo fincila yookiin immoo revolution waan jalqabaniif. Kanaafi during that period no Second Civil War also started in 1648. So one political group of the Scots had reached agreement with the Charles and sent an army to support him. Kana political partiin tokko Scotland keessa maal gochuu jalqabe mootii faana walii galeet mooticha gargaaruudhaaf yaadii gaggeesse. Kanaaf New Model Army quickly defeated the Scots and the English royalists during that period. So the majority of the army was now determined to put is a political party in tokko mootii gargaaruuf walii galtee irratti waliigee dhufee mootii gargaaruuf loltuu isaa ergee tureera. Kanaaf New Model Army quickly defeated the Scottish and the English royalists. Kanaaf again the second day also ended with the victory of what? The parliament or New Model Army in other word. So the majority of the army was now determined to put an end to the Charles and the monarchy. And after the Second Civil War, loltoonni kun maal ta'an nama Charles jedhamu kanaa fi monarchy kanaan gorra buusuudhaaf walii galan. Finally, Cromwell finally agreed to this. He was first of all conservative leader. So in December 1640, the army excluding from the parliament all members of House of Commons who did not agree with the army's program. What's the army's program? The army's program mean somewhat to put an end to the Charles and the monarchy. Kanaaf mootii Charles kanaaf monarchy isaa yookiin immoo bulchiinsa abbaa irree kana maal gochuudhaaf hangoorraa darbachuudhaaf. Kanaaf bara sana keessatti bara 1848 December 1648 bara 1648 I mean 1648 the parliament also excluded all members of the parliament of House of Commons especially did not agree with the army's program. Kanaaf loltoonni Charles fi monarchy hangoorraa buusuu barbaadu parlama keessa immoo warra kanarratti waliin galle hunda parlama isaanii maal godhan exclude them they clear that mean jarreen kan hunduu maal godhan parlama keessa ni qulqulleessan. Sababii kanaatiif warreen warra kan qulqulleessan warra programii loltuu faana waliin galle warra ajanda loltuu kana faana waliin loltuu ajanda loltuu immoo maannin bulchiinsa Charlesidhaa fi monarchy kana angorraa buusuudhaaf. Kanaaf this known as what in 1648 December 1648 the army excluded from the parliament all members of House of Commons who did not agree with the army's program. In that case, those the members of House of Commons who remained were called ramp. Kana warri immoo gaaf sanarraa afan maal jedhamanii waamaniiru? Ramp jedhaman. Ramp jechuun warra kamidha? Warra ajanda yookiin proogiraamii loltoota afaan walii galanii tarra yookiin immoo warra afan gaaf sana. Ramp meaning remnant or left over jechuudha. Warra irraa afan when the army cleared all exclude or cleared all somewhat members of House of Commons who did not agree with the army's program. Those who also agreed with the army's program and left over known as what? Ramp. This one is the most important one. So the ramp and the army then staked show trail of what the king and the Charles was publicly paid in January 1649. Kanaaf ramp warri jedhaman kun warri raafanii fi loltuu walii galanii namicha kana adda baay'eetti baasanii maal godhan? Ni ajjeesan, beheaded yookiin immoo mormarraa kutan. Then House of Lords was abolished. Kanaan booddee maal godhan? House of Lords abolished. Now House of Commons also somewhat remained. That means rampi qofa jira jechuudha. Kanaafi rampi means the member of what? Long parliament jechuudha. Long parliament means from 1640 up to 1653. That event also occurred in 1648. This is known as what? Ramp. Kanaaf achiin booddee maal ta'e? House of Lords also abolished. First of all, we have said that English Parliament divided into two important houses, House of Lords and the House of Commons. House of Lords include the heads of what? Noble family, Archbishop and the Bishop. Isaan kun House of Lords jedhamu. Isaan kun dumuun dhorkaman sanaan booddeetti. After the days of King Charles, England became a republic, declared a republic called Commonwealth. Commonwealth means a republic form of government after the days of King Charles I in 1649. So it was not, however, anyway democratic state. After the second civil war, Cromwell moved fast to smash leveler movement inside and outside the army. Kanaaf leveler mean secular political movement yenneerra. Siyaasaan yookiin sochii yookiin immoo sochii siyaasaa amantirraa bilisa kan ta'e. Maal jedhama? Leveler political movement dha. Garuu after the end of second civil war, Cromwell, the leader of the army, Cromwell means leader of the army, moved fast to smash leveler movement. So this known as this was the defeat of the first secular democratic movement in modern Europe. Kanaaf inni kun maayidhaan injifatamu maaliiti? The defeat of the first secular democratic movement in Europe jedhamande kun. That means when a person or Cromwell fast to smash leveler political movement isaan kan dhabamsiisuudhaaf gaafa yaalii gaggeessu. Kun maal jedhama? Europe keessatti the defeat of first secular democratic movement in modern Europe. This one is the most important one. So from 1648 up to 1653, the ramp of the long parliament ruled England. This one is upheld by the army. Kanaaf loltuudhaan deeggaramanii kan isaan Englandin bulchan bara 1648 kaasee hanga bara 1653. However, the army and its leaders became dissatisfied with the ramp. Atoma loltoonni fi hooggantoonni isaanii maal hin taane bulchiinsa raampii kanatti qoofuu hin dandeenye. Raampiin kan bulche 1648 kaasee hanga 1653. But the army and its leaders became dissatisfied with the ramp during that period. As a result, in April 1653, Cromwell took soldiers into the House of Commons. House of Commons and dismissed the ramp. This ended the long parliament. The long parliament ended in 1653. When Cromwell took soldiers into the House of Commons and dismissed the ramp, this led to the end of what? Long parliament. First of all, long parliament mean from 1640 up to 1653. Kana bara 1640 kaasee 1653 kan jiru long parliament jedhama. Kana bara 1653 Cromwell immoo loltuu fudhate House of Commons and somewhat dismissed ramp. Ramp also eliminated during that period. So Cromwell himself now ruled England, Scotland, Ireland to be by what? To by conquest. Kanaaf kanan booddee bulchaa England, Scotland fi Ireland kan ta'e jechuudha. A person called Cromwell. So Cromwell ruled it until his death in September 1658. The ruling class of England, who had been divided by the Civil War, united to restore the monarchy after the death of a person called Cromwell. That means, so when the general Mock, who commanded the strong section of the army, decided to support restoration of the monarchy, restoration became certain. As a result, in May 1660, Charles I's eldest son, who was also named Charles, entered London and began to rule as Charles II. Charles died. Now Charles I died. After that, the restoration also occurred, especially General Mock, who commanded the strong section of the army. Hajamno Ranalul Tuchima Kante decided to support restoration of the monarchy here. Restoration became certain. So in May 1660, Charles I's eldest son, he was died. In that case, after that, his son also came to power. In somewhat this person entered London and began to rule as Charles II. In the place of Charles I, his son came to power. This event known as what? Restoration. Why it was known as restoration? Because restoration, the monarchy, that means the restoration of the monarchy. The king restored the monarchy. He restored the House of Lords, restored the State Church of England, with its archbishop and the bishop, who had been abolished by long parliament in 1646 and the Italian constitution during that period. This event known as what? Restoration. Restoration means under Charles II. Charles II means the son of Charles I. What is known as restoration? Restoration malif jedhame. Restoration malif jedhame because the king restored, Charles II restored the monarchy, House of Lords, State Church of England, and the traditional constitution. This event known as what? Restoration. Bakkatti deebisee dhaabe. Paarlaamaa bakkatti deebisee, House of Lords bakkatti deebisee, monarchy bakkatti deebisee, Church of England bakkatti deebisee, traditional constitution bakkatti deebisee. One thing this event known as what? Restoration. Because he restored the monarchy, restored the House of Lords, restored the Church of State of England, State Church of England, and restored traditional constitution. This event known as what? Restoration. Again, Charles was not absolute monarch, but he had no rule. But he had to rule with parliament and with support of what? Nobility and the gentry during that period. So he was not absolute monarch, and he had to rule with parliament and with support of nobility and the gentry. This one is the most important one. Charles has no legitimate children. Kanaf Charles nimmo hilma mataa isaatiin qabu waan ta'eef, after his death, when he died, his brother became king as James the First, James II, and ruled from 1685 up to 1688. Kanaaf erga immoo Charles II kun ilma waan hin qabneef erga du'e aangootti kan dhufe immoo obboleessaati. Obboleessa gaaf dhufu maal jedhama? James II aangootti dhufe. This ruled James II also ruled England from 1685 up to 1688. He was accepted as king on the understanding that so he himself as a Catholic, he would not interfere with the Protestant State Church of England. Namni Catholic waan ta'eef dhimma amantii Protestant keessa immoo galuun barbaadu jedhee gara aangootti dhufe waan ta'eef, but the people soon began to suspect that James intended to undermine Church of England and make England Catholic. Manmoo shakkii jalqabe ammas shakkiin isaanii man namni kun immoo amantii Protestantii gadi qabuudhaa fi amantii Catholic iddootti deebisuuf jedhanii waan yaadaniif. So they also suspected that James was trying to establish an absolute monarchy. Kan biraa shakkiin isaa lammaffaa immoo James the First kun immoo absolute monarchy hundeessaa jiraadhan. Sababii kanaatiif a small group of ruling class, somewhat secretary invited William of Orange, that is the Protestant leader of Dutch Republic, and marrying James's Protestant daughter, husband, to come to what? England with the army. Kanaaf boksatti immoo warri muraasti maqtan nama immoo William of Orange jedhan gara aangootti waaman. Namni kun Protestant leader of Dutch Republic dha. And marrying husband somewhat James's Protestant daughter. Intala James kan jedhamtu amantii Protestant kan hordoftu fuudhe waan ta'eef, this person also invited to England by a small group of ruling class. This person also, William, was willing to somewhat bring England into his alliance system against the power of France and Louis XIV. Kanaaf William arrived in England with Dutch army in November 1688. As a result, parliamentary supremacy also started, and the Bill of Rights started under James, a person called William. This one is the most important one. First of all, Glorious Revolution ture. Afan gon a person called Charles irraa gara Jamesitti karaa nagaa darbu. Inni kun maal jedhama? Glorious Revolution jedhama. Ammoo gaafa King William aangootti gaafa dhufu inni kun maal jedhama? Parliamentary supremacy and the Bill of Rights jedhama. What does it mean? In 1689, when the King William II, the third, and the Queen Mary became John Tudors of England, and the Parliament presented to them declaration that came to be known as the Bill of Rights. Kanaaf gaaf sana Parliament jarreen kanatti maal fide gaafa James William III fi namni bakka James bu'e kun, James II bu'e kun fi haati manaasaa Queen Mary intala James kan taate ishiin kun became John Tudors of England. The Parliament presented to them declaration that became known as the Bill of Rights. So the famous document assured the people certain basic rights. This document known as what? Magna Carta, Bill of Rights, and the petition right as legal agreement, guarantee of English liberty. This one is known as parliamentary supremacy because the Parliament presented declaration to the King and the Queen during that period. Then that known as what declaration called the Bill of Rights. The Bill of this it is stand with Magna Carta. Magna Carta means the democratic document in England, similar to the American Declaration of Independence. So it also somewhat permitted petition of rights as legal guarantee of English liberty. This one is the most important one. So the Bill of Rights listed certain rights. Bill of Rights lists certain rights that were the true, ancient, and indubitable right and the liberty of the people of English kingdom. So it is settled succession to the throne. Made it also illegal for the kings to keep standing army, and somewhat especially to leave taxes without parliament's approval or to be Roman Catholic Church. Kanaaf Bill of Rights kun wanta garagara of keessa qaba. The certain right like the true, ancient, indubitable right and the liberty of the people of English kingdom, and it also settled succession to the throne. Namni akkamitti aangootti akka dhufuuf seera kan lafa kaa'edha. Made it illegal for the kings. Mootii isaa ittiin eeyyamamne to keep standing army loltuu dhaabbata yookiin immoo loltuu qophaa'e kan hin qabannedha. And to leave taxes without the parliament's approval or to be Roman Catholic Church. So this is all about our today topic. Next period, I will come up with the next topic, history for remedial, unit 3, part 3, the French Revolution. And you look at the Nada kind of warre mati Kenya tatan mati ambatu witatan. You send to the video can subscribe what share go to line go to get some bad warre mati time subscribe go to mati tasin in jenna. Robert Notagari, get a toma.